Ni hao, Hive Scum, and welcome back to another Astromax video. 10th edition has been out for a little while, and we finally have our first Codex. We have Codex Tyranids. So it's time to do our first true beginner-to-beginner Codex guide. So we're going to do Tyranids because it's the first one out. I'm really excited. This is going to be in a two-part format. So the first part, we're going to do just a topside discussion of the entirety of the Codex. Not really deep, not really going into any one specific area, really just kind of a general free-form conversation. Part 2, we're going to do a detachment deep dive. So we're going to pull one detachment out of the Codex and do a start-to-finish run on it from concept to table, how I would construct this list being a newbie to the Tyranid faction. This is the first time I've picked up Tyranids, so we'll see. We will see. Either way, we have a ton to cover. So we are going to consume the biomass, contact the hive mind, shadow in the warp. The day of assimilation is nigh. The way we're going to do this is not going to be like a comprehensive read-through of a codex. That's been done by many others who have more experience to talk about these things than I do. What I want to do is I want to talk about, like, if this is your first codex you're picking up for Warhammer, how does it stack up to things from the previous 2 editions? What are some changes in it? And as someone who's just coming to the faction and putting a collection together, what am I looking to do? What's my thought process of beginning, knowing what I know about collecting Warhammer in general? What's my thought process collecting a new army? Okay, so right off the bat, as far as layouts go, I like it seems like a small thing. But I like the table of contents in this book because it very clearly highlights where the army rules are, like the matched play rules, where they are. And I hope that this is something that Games Workshop continues to do, where you get the lore and then you get a beautiful big section of painted models and details about them and little snippets here. I could look at that section endlessly. That will be the thing about these codexes. If every single one of these codexes has that center section with all the models, the showcase, the army showcase, this is the best army showcase I've seen in a codex. And then you have your army, then you have your combat patrols. So you have like your beginner army rules, then your match play rules, and then your crusade rules. So that part is really fun. The lore part of it is like weak, I will say. The only part I really thought was cool, there's a 1 page that has a bunch of different weapons on it, like illustrations and then descriptions of them. Sometimes that is helpful when you're like putting a kit together to have like just a fun visual, like, oh, that's what that thing looks like, in terms of like painting it, modeling it, whatever. Like, that's fun to have. Not every codex has always had that for some reason. Some codexes have too many weapons, but this one has it, so that's cool. Moving on to, well, let's talk about models really quick. The new ones for the Tyranids are really cool. Like, really, really cool. So when we talk about lists, we're going to pick 2 detachments, and we're going to try and build some army lists in. One of them is, like, we're going to spend a lot of time in. That's a Vanguard Invader detachment, because that's the one that is most appealing to me. That's the one I'm going to build and collect in. But everything, like, all of it caveated rule of cool, because there's some weird, like, not everything that I think is cool about the old line and everything that's cool about the new lines, like, necessarily synergizes well together. So we'll dive in a little bit more about how to maybe navigate that as you build your own collections. Okay, so after we get through, like, the lore and the army showcase part, we get to page 62 of our codex, and this is where we start to see our army rules. Now, the same way that the faction rules for all of the same way that the index rules worked, is the same way the codex rules are going to work. We have our army rule, which is what you get for being Tyranids, and that's Synapse and Shadow of the Warp. So it's a two bullet point for the Tyranid army rule. And then you get your detachment rule, which comes with one of the 6 detachments that you select from this codex, and then whichever detachment you select unlocks your enhancements and your stratagems, the quantities of which have not changed from the indexes. So it's the same number of enhancements and the same number of stratagems as we've seen everywhere else. We're going to cover the army rules here real quick, and then we're going to dive into some of the detachments. Like I said, we're not going to do a full comprehensive breakdown and read through of every single one of them. I'm going to pick 2 detachments and that we're going to like really build lists in and play around with based on how I'm doing my collection. And then just some general thoughts on some of the other ones, how they all fit together collectively. So army rules for Tyranids haven't changed from the index. It's still Synapse and Shadow of the Warp. Synapse, it's a fun little mechanic where if you keep your models, certain models in range of your army, it boosts your army. There's one thing to note for like beginners, if this is like your first time coming to Warhammer, the way this is laid out in the Edition Codex isn't the most intuitive because you will see Synapse under your abilities in your data sheets, and then you will also see it under your keywords. So if you see it under abilities, it means that that model benefits from this ability. So if this model, say this Screamer Killer, is in range of this Nero Tyrant for Synapse, then it can benefit from the Synapse rule and roll 3d6 instead of 2d6 on a battle shock test. However, because the Screamer Killer does not have the Synapse word on its keywords, just under its abilities, not under its keywords, it does not generate Synapse to the Von Ryan Leapers over here. So if you want to generate Synapse, look for it under keywords. If you want to benefit for it, look for it under abilities. And then Shadow of the Warp is once per game. You can force an army-wide battle shock test on your opponent. So, you know, some if you craft your whole game plan right, you can sort of in the middle of the game or at some point in the game really kind of throw your opponent's first turn off or last turn off or game plan off because now they have to take a bunch of battle shock tests. And there's a rule in dice games that if you don't have anything else to do, just make your opponent roll dice because they eventually will roll, snake eyes. Eventually. I don't think that's actually a rule, but it's not a strategy I would recommend, but sometimes, it's a Hail Mary and sometimes Hail Marys work. All right, so now we get to the detachments. The Invasion Fleet really hasn't changed, and I think that's the index one. And I think it still maintains, like, just reading it as a new player, there's pretty much something that applies to all the models I like. So I really like the Screamer Killer model. It's not a great model. It's data sheet, and it's overcosted. Very clear on both of these topics. It's 170 points for, it costs more than most Chaos War Dogs and does far less. However, I think that there's a few areas where it can really work. We're going to have to put in some effort to get it to get there, but I like the model enough that it's going to be worth it. And Invasion Fleet, like there's enough you can do because you have rapid regeneration to put a Feel No Pain on it, so that makes it a little bit better. It's not a meta pick. Like there are some things that are just going to be flat out better. So the Zoranthropes, for instance, just are a better gun than the Screamer Killer. But Zoanthropes are really hard to find right now. So if you're beginning a Tyranid army right now, unless you're willing to go to Etsy and pay Games Workshop prices for, a 3D printed Zoanthropes, or unless you're willing to pay, double Games Workshop prices for Games Workshop Zoanthropes on like an aftermarket, it's hard to find Zoanthropes right now. So, hey, that's fine. I like the Screamer Killer model, and the gun on it is not bad, and I can get some mileage out of it if I just, plan ahead of time for it. So, it's the best news about it is you can score them on eBay right now for I scored one for $16. So, they're not hard to come up with. Invasion Fleet's cool for just about every model you could possibly want to collect. From the Tyranid line is my point there. And there's a couple detachments in here. Another one that does that is the Synapse Nexus. Did I get that right? Synapse Fleet. Synaptic Nexus. This one also, it works well no matter what you want to collect. Because what it keys off of here is just, again, that Synapse keyword, like the invasion fleet, and in some capacity, every Tyranid model is going to benefit from this. They either generate from it, they have it in keyword and abilities, or they have it in abilities. So it gives you access to everything. Now, if we look at the opposite spectrum of that, right? If you want to do something like the Assimilation Swarm, which keys off of the Harvester keyword, that's 4 models. So, one of them is the Ripper Swarm, and one of them is a Psychophage. So if you bought the Leviathan box set, good news, you're well on your way. And those models can be kit bashed and acquired relatively easily. So if you like the Psychophage, it's a Harvester, and you probably might already have one in your collection. Ripper Swarms are also Harvesters, and are also in the Leviathan box set, and also come in the Turrigon box set. And like I said, you can kit bash a lot of things to look like Ripper Swarms pretty easily. This one's cool because, again, it's a mechanic that requires you to stay in range of certain models, so you want to keep your army within 6 inches of these Harvester models, and that's going to allow them to regenerate. This is another detachment I've looked at for like the Screamer Killer and some of these, and like the Tyrannofex, that I really like the models, but the data sheets aren't great. So you kind of got to find ways to prop them up, which is, again, and this might be the last time I say it, maybe not. There are things that are meta, and then there are things that are not meta, and then there's things that you just like want to play with and collect. Do with your models what is fun to do with your models. End of the day, just like do that and go on from there. Because if you just start there and you move from there, you're always going to get an enjoyable experience. And this is an expensive hobby. There is no way around. Like, there's no getting around that. This is an expensive hobby. And there's nothing worse than investing time and money into a thing and then making yourself feel sort of like wrong for doing it. So however you want to build your army, geek your own way, there are ways to make it work. You're just going to have to put in more effort to get more out of your army than if you were to do some more obvious competitive like power builds. So that tirade aside, let's continue on to look at the Assimilation Swarm, because some underutilized models do pop up here. And one model that's everywhere, the Horspex, whatever, it's like the Rottweiler looking thing with the big tentacle mouth. It's a cute Rottweiler looking thing. That also has the Harvester keyword. So I like the Psychophage because it provides a Feel No Pain bubble. And again, because we don't have access to zoanthropes, we're looking at Screamer Killers to pick up a lot of the sort of mid-range firepower, supported by then, like, some lighter guns and some keyed heavier guns. So the Psychophage ability to provide the Feel No Pain that picks up where the Screamer Killer's armor save leaves off, plus the ability to then regenerate those larger models, is something that has the appeal to me in the Assimilation Swarm. However, the one that I am here for 100% is the Vanguard Invader, the Vanguard Onslaught detachment. So this is where we're going to spend most of our time, both when breaking this down, putting a list together, and then narratively speaking. Speaking of narratives, for 2 editions now, so this will be the 3rd edition. So I did it in 8th, did it in 9th, doing it now in 10th. I've done I've put together a long format, sort of, narrative to go through the entire edition to play with my gaming friends, my group. Edition, I got some new friends involved in Warhammer, so we have 3 new people. 3 people carried over from the previous campaign, and 3 were added in. So we're up to 6 players now. One of them is going to do Tyranids, so she is also drawn to the Vanguard Onslaught. She's here for the models, I'm here for the rules. So it's going to work out well, and we worked on putting these lists together. So what appeals most about the Vanguard Onslaught to me, as we read through this, is the ability to manipulate movement on the board. And I like armies that make me feel like my player's off balance or playing off balance. So like I can force my player to play frustrated and to play confused. confused about where I'm trying to get to, confused about what my objectives are, confused about where I'm going to be. Like any doubt I can see to my opponent, I love. And Vanguard Onslaught has a lot of fun tools to do that. So let's break this down. The first thing we're going to get is our detachment rule. And this is on top of Synapse and Shadow in the Warp, although neither one of those is going to play a huge role in this army. So we can play very decentralized, and that's key. Tyranids, so all Tyranids, not ones with just the Vanguard Invader keyword. So all Tyranid units with this ability are eligible to charge in a turn in which they fell back. Nifty. Vanguard Invader units, this is a separate keyword that's down there next to Synapse or in the same block as Synapse. Vanguard Invader units with this ability are eligible to charge in a turn in which they advanced. So now, if you have that Vanguard Invader, your army-wide fallback and charge and advance and charge. Not fall back and shoot, but fall back and charge and advance and charge. And then we have a little bullet point here, Vanguard Prime. It's actually a whole lot of flavor text, and then just a little bitty thing that says the Death Leaper can be a warlord in this detachment. Maybe you want to make him your warlord in this detachment. Maybe not. You definitely want one in this detachment because the Death Leaper is an awesome model. End of the day. But also for lots of other reasons too. Both competitively and non-competitively, the Death Leaper is an excellent model. Because like anything you want to do with Tyranids, he's great. Something that was obvious in 9th edition and is carried over into 10th edition is that when you're building an army list, you need to put in there units that can just go play the mission, right? You need units that can either deliver damage or take hits, and then you need units that can go play the mission and score points. And depending on what faction you pick, some factions are going to be better at the dealing damage, and some factions are going to be better at the point thing. But in Tyranids, having access to a lot of models that don't take up don't take up a whole lot of space, really, at the end of the day. Like a smaller footprint. Like the Death Leaper is still fairly large, but it's an overall smaller footprint or the same size footprint as 5 Infiltrators. It comes with low and operative. It's stealth. It's hard to hit. You got to get close to it. So it can just pop. It has deep strike. It can just be in parts of the board to count as a unit in a table quarter to score you points. And unless your opponent is really close to it, they can't really do anything about you scoring those points. So that's important to have. And as we go through this Invader Onslaught detachment, when we start thinking about units, we're going to look for as many of those as we can. So the enhancements we get with the Invader Onslaught are really cool. It's easy to just take 3 of these and spend like 50 points. But again, as with everything involving points, you want to have a reason for why you're doing it. So the first one up is Hunting Grounds. This one is while the bearer is on the battlefield. So it doesn't work if you have a unit in Deep Strike or off the board somewhere in Strategic Reserve. So right away, Hunting Grounds I don't like because it's a weird, like counterintuitive mechanic to the rest of this army. But while it's on the battlefield, anytime your opponent tries to set something up from Strategic Reserves, you roll 1d6, and on a 2+, that unit must take a battle shock test. So you get some pretty cool stuff out of it, but that model has to be on the board. The only place I could see is if you're going to take a character that doesn't have Vanguard Invader. So say you want to still take a Walking Hive Tyrant, free strat, 0 CP, then maybe you put this on it because you know it's always going to be on the battlefield. Then you know that this is always going to have value. But when I put my list together, I didn't have any characters that met that criteria. So, no. Chameleonic, however, the next one up, Prime. Vanguard Invader model only. The bearer has the stealth ability, and each time a ranged attack targets the bearer's unit, models in that unit have the benefit of cover against that attack. That's just good. And what I liked most about it too with the stealth, so you are -1 to hit and +1 to your saves on a Winged Hive Tyrant. Now makes the Winged Hive Tyrant pretty durable for something that then can take advantage of a lot of the other Invader Onslaught keyword, the Vanguard Invader keyword strats that come up later. So Chameleonic on a winged Hive Tyrant, which also I have to say, one of my favorite models is the Winged Hive Tyrant. I've always loved it. So when I was like, hey, we're gonna collect Tyranids, okay, I gotta start with the Winged Hive Tyrant because I love it. That and Warriors. Those are like the Warriors is what is just like my favorite IP of Tyranids, and Winged Hive Tyrants are like in that same group. Next we have Stalker, the next enhancement. This is another Vanguard Invader model only. At the start of the battle, select one enemy unit. Each time the bearer makes an attack that targets that enemy unit, add 1 to the hit roll and add 1 to the wound roll. It depends on what you can put it on. It's not terrible. And then the Nero node. This one is any Tyranid model. After both players have deployed their armies and determined who has the first turn. That's important. You can select up to 3 Vanguard Invader units from your army and redeploy all of those units. When doing so, those units can be placed into Strategic Reserve regardless of how many units you already have. So this one is really cool. It's not your typical... There's like 2 versions of this I've seen. One that happens like before you know who goes first, and one that happens after you've rolled for that. So you know if you don't go first, you can just pull those models off the board. Or redeploy them into better cover. Like it allows you to deploy really aggressively, and then if you don't get the first turn roll, sort of, fix it so that you're now deployed defensively. So this Nero node is, I think for this army, really, 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 really important. And more so because of the stratagems than other armies. I think it's always good to have access to this, but I think because of the stratagems, this gets even better. So let's read the stratagems so we can continue this conversation with more context. So first thing to note about the stratagems is they have 2 battle tactic stratagems. So you have 2 stratagems that you can manipulate the CP cost on. This comes out of the balanced data slate where unless it specifically states which stratagem you can manipulate, you can only change the CP cost on battle tactic stratagems. So this attachment has 2 such stratagems. The first one is Surprise Assault. And it's going to happen in your shooting phase or fight phase. And it's going to be on 1 Vanguard Invader unit from your army that has not been selected to shoot or fight this phase, and 1 enemy unit. The enemy unit must take a Battle Shock test. Until the end of the phase, each time a model in your unit makes an attack against that enemy unit, add 1 to the hit roll. If the Battle Shock test was failed, add 1 to the wound roll as well. Nice. And a Winged Hive Tyrant in this detachment with the Chameleonic to make it a little bit more durable. You can get the Invader keyword on it here, so it can throw this onto a more prevalent like target, but still survive long enough, and then take some advantage of some of this other stuff coming up. The next one is Assassin Beasts. 1 Vanguard Invader. So this one's going to happen in the fight phase. It's going to be 1 Vanguard Invader infantry unit from your army that has been selected to fight this phase. Until the end of the phase, melee weapons equipped by models in your unit have the precision ability. So if you have you could stack this with the previous one, pay 1 CP for 2 effects, get +1 to hit, possibly +1 to wound, and precision on a blob of Tyranid warriors with a winged prime for sustained hits. Yeah, nice. I wish it wasn't just on infantry. Like, I wish you could put this on, like a winged tyrant with the bone swords to just like crash it into, an opponent and get the precision to like snipe out characters. But whatever. Next we have Seeded Broods. So this is going to be, this is a strategic ploy. In the movement phase, 1 Tyranid unit from your army that is in reserves, or up to 2 Vanguard Invader units from your army. This is a common thing for the rest of these strats, or many of the rest of the strats coming up. It's going to be 1 Tyranid or 2 Vanguard Invader, a way to sort of double. So as we're putting our collection together, we want to really make sure we're getting the most out of these Invader keywords that we can. Until the end of the phase, for the purposes of setting up those selected units on the battlefield, treat the current battle round number as being one higher than it actually is. So, I'm sorry, there was a sentence on the previous one. So it's one Tyranids unit from your army that is in reserves, or up to 2 Vanguard Invader units from your army that are in reserves. You can treat the battle round as being one higher. So it's a turn 1. So, right, going back to the Nero node, we've used that. We're going second. We've used that to pull models off the board. Now we're going... We're going second on turn 1. We can use Seeded Broods to bring 2 of those 3 units back on to the board in our opponent at the bottom of our of the first turn. Next, we have Hypersensory Scylla. Your opponent's movement phase just after an enemy unit ends a normal advance or fallback move. Up to 2 Vanguard Invader units from your army that are within 9 inches of that enemy unit, or 1 other Tyranids infantry unit from your army that is within 9 inches of that unit. So that same split there. So 2 invaders, 1 not invader that are within 9 inches. Those units can each make a normal move up to 6 inches. The restriction is that you can't target a unit that is within engagement range of 1 or more enemy units, but other than that, so you get a 6-inch move. Sweet. This is super handy on a Death Leaper, because or anything with stealth, really. You finally get close enough to shoot it, and oh, I'm so sorry. If you didn't measure it exactly right and you came a little too close, I'm now going to move away from you. So again, really making your opponent always think about what they're doing. Always, if the more information you can make your opponent think about and assess in their turn, the more likely it is that they're going to make a mistake. This game requires a ton of information. So if you're trying to put your opponent off foot, making them remember more things is a good way to do it. Now, if you're doing something a little bit more casual and fun, you're probably going to want to remind them as they come closer to you to be like, hey, just remember, I have this strat. Next on our list of strats, we have Unseen Lurkers. When your opponent's shooting phase, just after an enemy unit has selected as targets, the target is 1 Vanguard Invader unit from your army that was selected as the target of 1 or more of those attacking units. Until the end of the phase, your unit can only be selected as the target of a ranged attack if that attacking model is within 12 inches or if your unit has the lone operative ability. If the attacking model is within 6 inches, your opponent can select new targets for attacking units' attacks. So many words to say. Awesome strat. And then the last, we have Invisible Hunter, up to 2 Vanguard units. This is the end of your opponent's fight phase. End of your opponent's fight phase. Up to 2 Vanguard Invader units from your army or 1 Tyranids infantry unit from your army. Remove the targeted units from the battlefield and place them into strategic reserves. The targeted units must be more than 3 inches away from all enemy units is the restriction on that. So at the end of your opponent's fight phase, you can... So I can just see a scenario where your opponent has finally gotten over to close enough to the Death Leaper, and they've positioned themselves to be not within 9 inches because they don't want you to move away, but, within 12 inches that they're still targetable, and they're getting ready to make that charge. They've shot you, and they've gotten you down to 1 wound, and they're like, finally, it's turn 4, I'm finally going to kill this thing. But they fail their charge. And then you're just going to pull it off the board and redeploy it in your movement phase on the next turn on the other side of the board to score you even more points. It's fun. I love it. I love it. So there's some fun shenanigans inside that invader detachment. But one thing that it's lacking outside of, there's that one strat there at the beginning to give you +1 hit and a possible +1 wound. That's the only damage output sort of lifter that's in there. Other than that, everything else is and there's really nothing to make you defensively better other than just moving away from your opponent or some enhancements to make you -1 to hit. But there's no feel, no pains. There's no invulnerable saves that you can get through enhancements or through strats. So you do give up all of that. But you gain some mobility. So let's take... We're going to put together a list here. But before we... do that, let's take a look at the Crusade rules here, because this is the first time, and we're not going to go deep dive into this because I know Crusade isn't everybody's jam, right? And if you're brand new to Warhammer, here's the best way I can explain Crusade to you. It's a way to be rewarded for playing multiple games with the same army. There's a lot of narrative that you can build in straight on the tabletop with a stranger with no pre-existing context in just every single match to play. It happens all the time. Just based on the dice rolls and the movements and all the stuff, and it's a really fun aspect of the game. But there's a really good chance that for a lot of people, myself included, that most of your games are going to start happening against the same people with the same collections. So a Crusade is a mechanic with which you get extra layers of rules and incentives for like playing with the same army and sort of leveling up your army as you go. The only other thing I want to say about the Crusade section, as I haven't really had this book long enough to start, and I haven't played enough games with Tyranids yet to really start like delving into it. There's a lot of the stuff you would like normally expect to find in Crusade, but it does look, the layout has changed quite a bit from the 9th edition codexes. The depth of the content, like just the amount of effort that Games Workshop put into the layouts and the rules here seems more than in the previous editions. So I think like that's a good sign. So I put together a 1,000-point list as an example of where I'm starting my Crusade force at. And then, or where, you know, this Crusade force is starting at. All right, let's turn to our app and start putting some units together. So character-wise, we're doing a Death Leaper, because that's like the whole point of this detachment, is to like have cool like assassin models around. Then we're going to take a Winged Hive Tyrant, and we're going to do, I'm not sure, you know, like the melee version is definitely better. But that works against the, like, if I'm charging into, although I can fall back. So with being a Vanguard invader, right? So I do have the be able to go in and fall back kind of mechanics. But getting bogged down in melee is not where you want this Winged Hive Tyrant to be. I don't think it's where you want the Hive Tyrant to be at all. But particularly this one because, you know, it limits the Vanguard invader stratagems you can use for redeployment. And it also limits the enhancement that we want to eventually put on it, which is that chameleonic, which if you're not doing Crusade and you're just putting 1,000 points together for match play, like just pop that on there because it's, you know, you want the extra durability. But so I haven't quite decided on that. At the moment, I'm leaning towards the Venom Cannon because I don't know, like I want it to be sort of a distraction piece on the battlefield because it's big, right? So the first thing I think someone is going to notice, particularly someone who's new to the game, is going to notice, and remember, this is a list we're putting together for new players to play against each other with. One thing they're going to notice is it's big. This is kind of an intimidating looking model. So I think they're going to try and just like, oh, I got to kill that thing. I got to kill that thing. I got to kill that thing. Not realizing that it really isn't all that threatening. Now that trick's going to like get old after a little bit, but you know, maybe by then we'll have more points in the army or whatever. But I think the Venom Cannon with just the ability to like sit back and sort of, you know, pop targets here and there, particularly like try and pick out smaller targets that are lurking around sort of the edges of the battlefield is something that this character is going to do. And now in a Crusade, what we're trying to do is just keep this guy alive and earn points in every game. In a match play scenario, what we're doing with this is trying to score points, and just by like being in a table quarter, by redeploying, and just frustrating the hell out of our opponent. Just making them come between this and the Death Leaper. Just keep them on opposite sides of the boards from each other, and just keep making your opponent play whack-a-mole with them, is the concept. Now, also, let's talk real quick about if you are buying your first Tyrant, you're going to get, there's two versions you can build. You can build a walking one, you can build a flying one. They're examining it. there is definitely a way that you can clip the tail on the flying version and turn it around and move the legs a little bit so that you can still kind of get the height at the top of the model to make it tournament legal while not having it like just look while still also being able to put the walking version of it so you can get 2 for 1 out of your model is what I'm trying to get at here. I happened to have accidentally come across a second Hive Tyrant in an eBay bid. I thought I was just bidding on a boarding patrol that was exceptionally well priced because nobody wants the old Gene Stealers anymore. But it was a lot bid, so it had that plus a Tyrant in it, unbuilt, new in box. So as soon as I had that information, I was like, well, I'm just going to build a wing version, and I'll build a walking version. Now, I didn't magnetize the wings because I love this model. Now, on the other one, the walking version, I will magnetize those wings. My suspicion is that they're going to be like a little weird and droopy because like sometimes magnets are, I don't know, fickle like that. But the weapons are the other arms, super easy to magnetize. So highly recommend doing that because you never know like what you're going to want at any given time in your model, and keeping the versatility is cool because, I mean, sometimes you get lucky and you get really good deals on eBay, but now I still have to store two of those models somewhere. So there's so this is the arm for it here, right? This is I don't know, one of the scaling talons. So this little ball joint right here at the top right there, you just drill into that a little bit. That's where you're going to super glue your magnet into, and then just you can pop it on and off of there. I highly recommend just like go to like, if you don't own a drill, go to Harbor Freight and buy like a $20 drill. You're just going to use it for miniatures, so it doesn't need to be like a good power drill. Just go buy the cheapest power drill you can find. You just want to be able to like turn the bit. And then go buy like a cheap pack of bits. The more small bits you can get, the better. You don't need like the super, super fine ones, but like the small ones. And then Amazon, $20, some rare earth magnets. The thinner, the better. And get like a medium size and like a small size because you want some for smaller joints than others. And it's... Start doing it now. I did a video a while ago on like Goliath, and that was like the second model I'd done magnets. I'd done a Forge Fiend, and then I did that one. I've now done my Hive Tyrant, and I started doing some Chaos Knights. This is the most recent one I did. So we were able to magnetize the arms. We were able to magnetize the face, so I can put whatever face I want on this dude. I can put whatever arms I want on this dude. This is my 4th one, and this took me 10 minutes to magnetize. It really can be done on the winged Hive Tyrant. And then we have a winged Tyranid Prime. Now the winged Tyranid Prime is a Vanguard Invader, and it gives Vanguard Invader to whatever units it's attached to. So keep that in mind. We didn't put any battle line units in this iteration. Those are going to come as we increase in points, but I figure, Crusade, as units get eliminated in battles, they can take on side effects, negative side effects. So you end up having to like cycle units eventually out of your collection or out of your army roster, your order of battle. And my suspicion with Tyranids is that battle line is like those guys are going to be dying all the time. So I want to use the 1,000-point games, the learner games, to sort of level up these new players' like coolest units. So we're not getting distracted with like, oh, do gargoyles do anything? No, it's like shooting pistols. Just move on with your life. A wound is a wound. But anyway, so we didn't put any battle line units in. So we're just going to jump down to other data sheets. The oh so lovely named other data sheets. First up, we have Barb Gaunts. I realize that this probably is like runs counterintuitive to everything I said previously in the battle line section about small units and whatever. Yes, I anticipate these guys are going to die and they'll get cycled in and out. But a big part of what I think is going to make this detachment viable is going to be the ability to manipulate your opponent's movement. We have the Neurolictor. This is one of the new models. It's really cool. This one was fun to put together. This and the Death Leaper were fun to put together, but not like... They were fun because of the final product. The steps themselves were a little frustrating. The pieces were a little finicky, a little small. Like I'm kind of a clumsy guy, so but they were fun. So we're taking the Neurolictor for the same reason that we took the Death Leapers. It's infiltrators, it's lone operative, it's stealth. So it can operate by itself, it can operate anywhere, it can score you points doing anything. But it also then has a couple of really cool abilities. So the Feeder Tendrils, each time it kills a character, you gain a CP. Whatever. Probably never going to happen. But the Neural Disruption, in your command phase, select one enemy unit within 12 inches of this model, take a Battle Shock test. Cool. And then we also have Psychological Saboteur. Anything with the word Saboteur, I'm here for. This is an aura. So while an enemy unit is within 12 inches of this model, if that unit is battle shocked, each time a model in that unit makes an attack, subtract 1 from the hit roll. Each time a friendly Tyranids model makes an attack that targets that unit, add 1 to the wound roll. So this is those like really coveted +1 wound rolls that like you have to look for in Tyranids because you just don't have the raw data sheet power that other armies have. There's just like strength 9 is everywhere in this codex, and it just doesn't. You can't build on strength, like you can't win on strength 9 alone. Strength 9 +1, you're a little bit better off. Strength 9 +1 to wound, that is. So that's pretty cool. So that's why the Neurolictor's in there. That's pretty self-explanatory. And I think just generally speaking, like that's just a meta pick. I don't think you could go wrong owning a Neurolictor. Next on our list, because it's the coolest freaking model in the entire 40k lineup, we have an Orn Emissary, and it's going to be in there from day... Mine shipped to me a little late, so I haven't got it put together yet. So the Orn Emissary is one of the few it and the Barbgons are like the non-invader models that we've taken. The Barbgons, we've discussed why. The Norn Emissary, its abilities to get objective control 15 on any objective, like you just pick one, and now if you get within a certain range of it, you can get to objective control 15 and feel no pain. Singular purpose, right? The second bullet point on singular purpose. Select one objective marker until the end of the battle. While this model is within range of that objective marker, it has the Feel No Pain 5+ ability and an objective control characteristic of 15. And against mortal wounds, it has a 4 Feel No Pain. So if you want to try and like go at it with mortal wounds, it's even better. My thinking here is that whatever the least accessible objective for my opponent is, objective marker, that's the one I'm going to pick, and that's the one I'm going to walk to. So I'm probably, whenever possible, going to try and place this model last. So my opponent has their entire army set up. I'm going to place this guy last, and I'm going to place him in the least opportune, like most annoying possible position for my opponent. The objective that they weren't really planning on going to, whatever. Because now I'm just going to go put 15 OC on it with a bunch of wounds and a 5-up Feel No Pain and some pretty gnarly shooting. And I'm going to say, walk over here and deal with it. Or ignore it all game and just give me the points. And if you ignore it for too long, it's going to start slapping you around. All on its own. So it's not a distraction piece because it's 290 points, but it is a bring your opponent over to it piece. I'm hoping that they have to bring enough of their resources over into the quadrant of the board that this thing is going to live in, that it leaves 2 other quadrants of the board like a little bit more exposed. So my deployment, I'll definitely have locked down. This one with the Norn Emissary will have lockdown. And then as my opponent moves in to deal with the Norn Emissary, one of the, either his deployment zone or one of those other deployment zones is going to get softened up just enough. I don't know if they necessarily fit the bill yet. Time will tell. But we're going to try Tyranid warriors with melee weapons and the winged prime as the like, I don't know, the other. So the emissaries are a big level threat at 1,000 points. And then we're going for this Tyranid warrior brick with the sustained hits, the ability to relocate it and move it around, the ability to put precision on it as well with that strat that we had, and the +1 to wound. Because I don't want to rely too much on melee, because there is still, you know, the restriction on not being able to put your units back into deep strike if they're bogged down in melee. And I don't want to get tied down. So I don't want to rely too much on melee. But Tyranids need some, because that's where a lot of their best weapons are. So it's a fine line on this Vanguard Invader detachment. And it's one of those things when I say that some detachments you just got to work a little bit harder for. This is an area where you got to work a little bit harder. Because you're limited to the number of units that have the Invader keyword, 15. And so the more things you include without that keyword, the more it looks like, well, why are you playing this detachment? 10th edition is just getting rolling, so who knows what the future's going to look like for us. But we're definitely going to keep doing codexes as they come out, because that's fun. Information that you think is important for new Tyranid players to have, like, throw it down in the comments for sure. And if there's like a rules mechanic that I got wrong somewhere in there, which probably occurred like 1,000 times, definitely feel free to throw, like, to call that out. Like, I got tough skin. Like, be nice about it. Particularly if it's somebody else that's commenting on there. Like, be nice to each other. But, you know, the important thing is that we all get better at playing these factions, and we all learn. So if we can learn from the comments just as much as we can from the content of the video, that's fine too. But either way, subscribe, like, and if no one soloed you today, remember to geek your own way.